Ladies and gentlemen, we are back for the first time. Once again, fourth in frames. It is week 4. I am Rhett Manuel with my co-host here, as always, on my side, my boys, Nate Markham and Drew Scott. As tonight we preview week 4 of the NFL season, talk about some smash, pass, and stash plays, as well as redrafting the first round of fantasy football drafts nearly 1 month into the season. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
Fellas, first off, man, it's been a couple weeks since we've been live here with all of our watchers and listeners, man. So first off, for everybody that's here with us and has been patient with us as we've kind of had to change the schedule up for the past couple weeks, thank you for being faithful with us. Thank you for hanging out with us tonight. I mean, as always, we love having you guys with us. I love hanging out with these dudes, and I love talking ball with these guys on the Fantasy and Frames Network, which, by the way, if you don't already, do not forget to like, subscribe, review, and just anywhere we are, leave some positive vibes so that any way we drop a new podcast or a new short or anything, you're right there with us enjoying that content. Also, don't forget fantasyandframes.com. We've got those starts and sits every week. You know, we've got these articles. We got all the IDP stuff, updated rankings, just so much to take in. So, guys, I know we've been talking for the past couple of weeks, but it just hits a little different whenever we're live together. So, along with our audience. So, Drew, how the heck are you tonight, buddy?
I'm doing great, man, but I'm kind of on the edge of my seat already after we just got started because our boy, I can't even say friend of the show, absolute family, our boy Chris B. Says that he's got a smash pass and a stash for us. So I'm sure he's going to reveal that in the comments at some point. So I say that to say, if you're not on YouTube already, go hop on the YouTube so you could be in the comments with Chris, and maybe you got a smash, pass, and stash for us too. But I'm doing great, man. The Rams finally got a win, and I know everybody cares about our favorite NFL teams, or they're very invested. So, I'm doing good, man. I feel good. Anytime the Rams beat the Niners, I'm doing great. All right, so we got it. Rhett, Drew, Nate. I'm going to assume that that's in order, which means that I'm a pass. And so, you know what? Fuck you, Chris. But everybody else, welcome to the show.
Stashing the old man, huh? That's a crafty move. Putting the seasoned vet just in case,
the savvy vet on your bench just in case.
Hey, little sugar daddy action is what we got going on right there. We see you, Nate Markham.
What if you stashed Andy Dalton at the beginning of the season? Guess what? You just had yourself a QB2 week in week 3. So super savvy move. That's the Chris Battistel type approach that we have grown to love.
And also, I don't want to tout my own BS from last week, Drew, but remember when I said you guys should get Tutu Atwell in your lineups this week as a joke? What happened, guys? Who was the Rams' leading receiver last week?
Hey, and I was on Twitter, YZR Fantasy over on Twitter. He posted out, hey, like, who's a deep stash that could have a 15-point week? And I put on there, it's Tutu Atwell week. There was something to that. You know, he didn't play a ton of snaps until Kupp got hurt, but once Kupp got hurt, he led the Rams in first read share, and he led the Rams in yards per route run. I don't know why it takes all these injuries to get him on the field, but every time they put him on the field, good things happen. So, you know, with all these receivers out, man, you can do worse than Tutu Atwell because the Rams defense they're not great. And so the offense is going to have to throw the ball. And that's something McVay and company have never been shy to do. So if you're in a bad spot, I think you can do much worse than Tutu. So yeah, that was a great call, man.
Yeah. I mean, however joking it was, it ended up being a great call. So before we get into tonight's Smash, Pass, and Stash, guys, let's get into news and notes on the upcoming week for week 4. But Nate Markham, I think what happened last week was I got in here, I got a little braggy, I got a little bit over the top. You know, I started talking a little bit of trash. I may have had a bad take about Saquon Barkley due to my trash talk. Is there anything you'd like to say after the fact, after I, for lack of a better way of putting it, more or less soiled the bed last week?
I wouldn't. I would say it was, an unlucky go. You have every right to be, pump your chest out a little bit, because if you don't, no one else is gonna support you. You got to sometimes pat yourself on the back. The problem is you reach a little too far and did the old, the Icarus shoulder, I guess, when you reach too far, too close to the sun, or however you want to compare those two. And it is what it is. But hey, I have a question. How does it feel, though? Because now you can say, how does it feel to be the second team in scoring, which is still better than both the Chiefs and the Rams. So that doesn't feel so bad, right? Second place is still second place.
Second place is the first loser, and I feel more humbled than I did last week. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, hey, a quick show of hands. Whose team is still undefeated? Anybody else?
No.
Just
okay.
All right, so let's go ahead and get to this question from Za215. Thank you, Za. We appreciate you hanging out with us, Za. We see you. We see where you're coming from, and we appreciate you for it. So he says, yo, fellas, got a trade question for you. Should I Tank Dell for Pickens or Ayuk? Or should I hold on to Tank Dell? It's a full PPR Superflex Dynasty. Let's go ahead and start with you, Nate.
Man, the Dynasty portion of it, it's like I love the fact that Tank Dell's tied to CJ Stroud for that time. And I don't think Stephon Diggs is going to be there forever. So the Dynasty portion of that ups his value, not knowing who's going to be in Pittsburgh. Like I would normally say, honestly, I think rest of the season, I'm higher on Pickens than I'm on Tank Dell, but not by much. Yeah. Not enough to offset the Dynasty implications that could happen as a result. Same thing with Ayuk. I know he's paid, but maybe another piece falls or whatever. We're starting to see that already. Age is catching up and liability with that injury. So I'm going to stick with Tank Dell as much as I really like the Pickens rest of season.
Yeah, for me, if you can get Ayuk for Tank Dell and Dynasty, I would do that. Now Pickens and Tank Dell, I think that they're relatively close to where it just comes down to personal preference. I prefer Tank Dell personally, but I get if you're worried. I just think 3 weeks is a little bit too quick to be too concerned with Tank. But I think that him and Pickens, I think that's more of a lateral move, and so something I'm not really wanting to make as far as Dynasty goes. But if you could do Ayuk for Tank, I would do that.
And yeah, the way I kind of look at it is like this. I agree. I think Ayuk is the player with the most upside. He's also the oldest in this situation. In terms of what this offense looks like in the future, we know that the Texans just paid Nico Collins as well. So is there a path for Tank Dell to ever be the full-blown number one receiver in Houston? I'm not sure that's the case. So if you're looking at long-term Dynasty, I think George Pickens has a clear path to be that number one in Pittsburgh for the coming years. So just because of that, even if they're neck and neck this season, I think long-term, you might give a slight edge to Pickens. So I think you guys both kind of sound like you might reject that deal. I think I would maybe go for accepting that deal simply because I like the upside of Ayuk for the rest of the season and the fact that he's just the most talented dude of these three. And I like the long-term upside of Pickens as well. So thank you for that question, Za. We appreciate you hanging out with us tonight. So, Drew, once again, we want to congratulate you over the Rams winning against the San Francisco 49ers last week. I know it has to feel good after all these injuries you guys have had. Speaking of the 49ers, it appears that George Kittle returned to practice, but is still questionable for this coming week. If that is the case, if he doesn't play, guys, was Juwan Jennings a flash in the pan, or is that something we need to be monitoring for real?
He's not going to repeat last week, of course. I don't think anybody's asking him to repeat, but I think if a 22, 23% target share comes his way again, that's rosterable. The likelihood that Ayuk, we've seen Ayuk, can piggybacking from what we just talked about in that question from Za. Each week, Ayuk has gotten more reps. He's gotten more targets. It's trending in the right direction to him starting to finally, command. And I think that obviously he's not going to be, he's not a flash in the pan. That was your question. And I'm beating around the bush on that. No, he's not a flash in the pan, but no, I don't think that it's going to be chaos again.
No, the Ayuk ramp up is happening in a very real way and very soon. Go ahead, Drew. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty simple with Juwan Jennings. If if there's enough injuries for him to be the number 2 option, if Kittle's out, if Debo's out, if those guys are out, then you could play him. If at least 2 of their main pass catchers, between Ayuk, Kittle, Debo, if 2 of those guys are healthy, I'm probably not playing Juwan Jennings. Is anything more than like a deep flex play.
Yeah, and if I just call him Juwan Johnson by accident, I'm sorry for that disrespect to the top scorer in fantasy last week. New Orleans Saints are always on my mind. So speaking of always on my mind and people who rent-free in my head, Russell Wilson was a limited participant in practice on Wednesday. Justin Fields and the Steelers off to a 3-0 start. So let's just lead it off with you, Drew. If Russ is healthy, does he get his job back with a 3-0 start by Justin Fields? And if he would get his start back, would he be more beneficial to the pass game in Pittsburgh than Justin Fields was? Because Fields was actually very solid last week.
You said that Russell Wilson was an unlimited participant in practice?
No, he was limited, but he should have been unlimited.
Okay. My bad. No, I mean, I don't know how they can go away from Fields right now. Especially, I think he had his best game of the year last week. I mean, the Steelers being 3-0, that might play into decision. I don't think it should. Wins and losses are not a quarterback stat, but Fields, his play has been trending in the right direction. He didn't look great the first week, but each week he's gotten better and better. And I think the offense has much more upside with him in it as he gets more acclimated in it. And I mean, the reality is the Steelers had a pretty at least, compared to other things, a relatively easy start to the schedule or to their season. If you look later in the schedule, it starts to get pretty brutal. So if they make the transition to Russ, I think it's because the Steelers start to struggle with a more difficult schedule. But no, as of right now, I don't know how they take him out of the starting lineup.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. And I think the thing that stood out for me the most about Justin Fields last week was that his fantasy points came through the air. He had 6 carries for 6 yards last week on the ground. So this wasn't Justin Fields of the past where a lot of his fantasy output came from running the football and scrambling and getting those yards. No, he was legitimately a pocket quarterback last week. So if he is putting in that work, then Pittsburgh got a steal with a 6th-round pick. It's already paid off because as a backup quarterback, I mean, he's led them to a 3-0 start. So on to quarterbacks that we need to come back very soon. More on that later. Jordan Love is close to suiting up, was close to suiting up last week. There's a divisional game at home versus the Minnesota Vikings this week. That is a big one for the Packers. Nate Markham, does Jordan Love suit up or does he sit?
And I mean, I think Green Bay will ultimately, that's going to rest on just how healthy he is. That goes without saying. Do I think he plays? I think he does just because of the implications of the game. Do I think he should? I'm not sold completely on that. I would rather, I think he was close to playing because he wants to play. I don't know if he's close to playing because he is fully healthy and ready to go, but Minnesota's defense is no joke, man. That's going to be a challenge. It's a challenge for Malik Willis. That's what makes me think that it'll be Jordan Love just because they want to win the game. And I think that Love is better suited to be able to understand just the different looks that Flores is going to give. Not that Malik Willis hasn't played good. Malik Willis has been
solid.
It's ridiculous, but that should be a really, really good game. And I think all of us want Jordan Love back sooner rather than later.
But at the same time, we should have known the second that the Green Bay Packers traded for Malik Willis. It's like, oh, he's not dead. Like, they do this quarterback thing better than anybody. So it's like the second that trade happened, I shouldn't have brushed it off and been like, okay, so they needed a backup. No, it was actually like, okay, we probably should have seen, all right, they know something we don't because they always seem to know something that we don't when it comes to the quarterback position. So Joe Mixon still not practicing for the Houston Texans. Kareem Hunt to be part of a 3-man rotation. Probably not much going on with that. Agreed, Nate?
Yeah, it's not. They released Keontae Ingram. So, I mean, it's a less crowded backfield. I think that from what it sounds like within the locker room, they have trust in Carson Steele to at least do what he needs to do. There was just not enough volume Kareem Hunt right now, unless something crazy happens, which I haven't heard enough rumblings that there is in practice or even in play calling.
Yeah. Shocker. Austin Eckler is injured and will not play on Sunday. Should be a good situation for Brian Robinson. Drew Scott, this next tidbit is all you, baby. Jonathan Brooks, Dave Canala said today, is nearing a return from the ACL injury. Now that the Red Rocket, Andy Dalton, is in the saddle, baby, how do we feel about Jonathan Brooks going forward?
It is all systems go for Jonathan Brooks whenever he comes back, man. He is going to be a stud. You saw what Chuba Hubbard did. Imagine whenever Jonathan Brooks gets in there and he starts getting the, 70, 80% snap share. That dude is going to be a monster for fantasy down the stretch. If any of your league mates are somehow delusional to the upside that Jonathan Brooks carries whenever he does come back, go trade for him now while you can, because he is going to make it. He's going to be an incredible difference maker down the stretch. And I've got him everywhere. So I personally cannot wait. I've got a few teams that are looking at me like, man, even Jesus couldn't come back and save this team. But I have a couple of really solid teams with Jonathan Brooks on my IR, and I can't wait to put him in the lineup.
Likewise.
Yeah, I have him a couple places too. So we're all on the Brooks train right now. That sounds good. Speaking of things we're not feeling good about, Najee Harris rested in practice on Wednesday. Should be good to go on Sunday. That said, Jaylen Warren, I'm still battling some injuries. Marvin Harrison Jr. limited practice with a quad injury on Wednesday. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith not practicing so far either. So, Nate, you'll have more on that later. Tyler Huntley, a possibility to start on Sunday. And Alvin Kamara missed practice on Wednesday, but likely just to conserve him because he's had quite a workload over these past 3 weeks. So let's get to a couple of questions from our listeners before we go ahead and get to our start sits and everything for the week. First one we have from our boy, our Fantasy and Frames brother, Preston Evans. He said, "What's up, fellas? He has a Michael Pittman problem that has given him anxiety, and he can't sleep." Just joking. No, you're not joking. But really, he is getting on my nerves. Hold or trade. Nate.
Man, if you can trade and get something for him, congratulations. I just don't. You're a better salesman than me, and it didn't take much. But
you're a good salesman. Don't sell yourself short now. That's what you do.
Yeah, I couldn't sell Michael Pittman. I mean, granted, don't get me wrong. We did see last year, and I'm kidding. I won't even try to go into last year because as of right now, Anthony Richardson is tied to Michael Pittman, and I have hope that his fantasy stock will continue as far as Anthony Richardson goes. I don't have faith that he has enough passing volume in him and accuracy to support a Michael Pittman consistent rest of season.
Yeah. I mean, if you're selling Pittman, you're selling him for like bottom dollar right now, and that's just not what you want to do. I mean, hold him until he has a spike game. It's going to happen surely eventually, and then if you can recoup some of your value at that point, you can try to do it. But I don't think you're going to gain much by trading for him right now. Or trading him away right now.
Yeah, I think this Pittman thing is tough to go through right now. It also hasn't helped that it seems like Anthony Richardson built some serious rapport with Alec Pierce because Alec Pierce has had himself a couple nice games in these first 3 weeks of the season, which is frustrating for the
Josh Downs just came back too, and Richardson has Downs as well. So I don't think it's going to get much better for Pittman in the short term, at least.
No. Yeah, it's tough. All right, next one we have. Let's go ahead and let's give it Mr. Scampers. He said half PPR. Scampers, our boy, also in the Fantasy and Frames Listener League. Half PPR, Devin Singletary tomorrow or Chris Olave at Atlanta. Drew, lead us off. I think this is an interesting question.
Yeah, this shouldn't be as hard as it is, but it's not an easy question though. Like Singletary gets Dallas, who's been they've been the worst defense against running backs so far through 3 weeks. Like they are who you want to start your fantasy running backs against. And then you have Olave playing Atlanta. I don't know how much AJ Terrell he'll see, but Kansas City and I forget who they played in week 2. Atlanta played in week 2. Philly and Atlanta, their receivers saw overall, the receiver room as a whole saw decent success against Atlanta. So, it's tough because Singletary's getting like 15, 16 carries a game. Like, even though he's the main guy, he's only getting it's not like he's getting like an insane workload. It's not bad either, but the defense is very exploitable. I would have a really hard time sending Olave with how good the Falcon or the Saints offense has looked. Even though they came back to earth a little bit last week, Olave finally found the end zone. It's probably the wrong decision. It's probably the wrong answer, but I think I play Olave. But I don't feel good saying that, and that's so weird to say already 3 weeks into the season. But I get it if you want to play Singletary instead, but I think I would go Olave.
And it's also a weird season, so like don't beat yourself up on that because we're all having struggles right now. So guys, before we get into our smash, pass, and stash picks for tonight, let's go ahead and talk about Underdog, formerly known as Underdog Fantasy. Is helping out our listeners with free money, and who doesn't like free? If you use the promo code FRAMES, you will get a 100% match on your deposit up to $1,000. So deposit $1,000, get $1,000 back. Deposit $1, get $1 back. But $1,000 free dollars, dog, that's a pretty good deal. All you have to do is use the promo code FRAMES to make that happen. So don't miss out on all the fun and all the action over at our friends at Underdog today. So yeah, we're back for week 4, fellas. Let's talk a little smash, pass, or stash for week 3. This is our start, sit, and hold for the future segment. Keep in mind that a smash player is a player we have ranked outside of the top 20 wide receivers, top 15 running backs, top 8 tight ends, and top 12 quarterbacks. And so, Nate Markham, let's go ahead and start with you, and let's piggyback off of that question we just had from our listeners, because your first smash play for the week was part of that question.
It was. And if you do go over to Underdog and use the promo code FRAMES, you can take one of these players in the game tomorrow night. And if you want to go with Devin Singletary, who I'm all in. The only reason that it gave me pause between him and Olave is just because it was Chris Olave. It was the person against, and they're so close to me in the overall like point scoring for my rankings for this week. I get it, and he's talking about a flex position as far as when you have those two comparisons. But on Underdog, Devin Singletary has a prop of 82.5 total yards, higher or lower, which when they set that mark at 82 gives me, a pretty good feeling, because like you said, Roger, Dallas has been historically bad, not just bad by, they're the worst team against the run and, yards per attempt and scoring and everything. It's like historic, like the most touchdowns rushing against in, I think 3-4 years now, it through 3 games. And like I said, 8 touchdowns allowed, 557 yards, 5.4 yards per attempt, the 10th highest explosive run rate allowed, the lowest stuff rate, the 3rd most missed tackles created basically by poor tackling, and allowed a 7.8% touchdown rate. That all of those pieces build into just how Devin Singletary can move the chains and continue to put up just, the points to continue with that offense. That was the concern we had with the Giants. It wasn't just, Devin Singletary will get the volume. We don't think they're going to be good enough to even get in the end zone. And we've been proven wrong. I mean, Devin Singletary at the end of last week, which I hate it. I love it. I hate it. I love it because it's a great football play. I hate it because there were about 3 leagues where it was close and I lost out on the Devin Singletary touchdown. If you guys saw that, he slid down to 1. Despite that slide, he was the RB17 on the week, or RB10 on the week, RB17 on the season. He continues to be productive. I don't worry about any other backs eating into an actual role. All they are is change of pace and situational. And so with Malik Neighbors able to spread the field and that offense humming, and you've seen Daniel Jones really improve as a result of having Malik Neighbors and a productive Devin Singletary. They wanted Singletary. So I think Devin Singletary, for all intents and purposes, is a smash tomorrow. Would I still start him over Chris Olave? That I don't know quite yet. I'll have an answer for you, Scampers. At some point throughout the show, I'll make a decision. I will. I promise.
You just made me think a little bit harder about it. And I think I might even be swaying the other way at this point, man. I don't know.
Here we go.
So look, we just had a lot of talk about Devin Singletary, but I think Nate just unearthed the real truth for us. Drew, are we back with Danny Dimes? Are we back this year?
No. Daniel Jones still
We're not back.
No. Daniel Jones still stinks. He's just very, very fortunate to get to throw the ball to Malik Neighbors.
But for fantasy purposes, we may be back. He's a streamer, baby. Let's have it. Let's
Yeah,
go.
he might be a streamer for fantasy purposes. That I could possibly agree with, depending on the matchup.
All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about a Smash player who is no doubt coming into his own. Drew Scott had his best game of his young career so far last week. I mean, baby, let's talk some Roma Dunze versus the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, this week on which receiver gets to play the Los Angeles Rams, we have Romo Dunze. I don't really know if I need to say much else than that, but just for fun, I'll elaborate a little bit. The Rams can't hold anybody right now. Week 1, it was Jamison Williams. Week 2, it was Marvin Harrison Jr. Week 3, it was freaking Juwan Jennings. The Rams have been the 4th best matchup for fantasy receivers through 3 weeks based on the schedule-adjusted fantasy points given up to the position. And Romo Dunze is coming off the breakout game last week where he had 112 yards, 11 targets, 6 receptions, and he caught his first career receiving touchdown. Now, Keenan Allen was a limited participant in practice today. He does have a chance to play this week, but Odunze's played 90+% of snaps the last 2 weeks, and I don't know how you put the Ferrari back in the garage at this point after the game he had against Indianapolis last week. So he was unfortunately on my bench pretty much everywhere I had him last week, but this week I'm starting him with confidence. The Fantasy Pros week 4 expert consensus rankings has him down at wide receiver 34. I've got him up at wide receiver 28, and I'm afraid I might still be a little too low.
Yeah. Roma Dunze coming off of last week. I mean, just the fact that they threw the ball so much last week. I mean, it was a crazy amount, which brings me into my Smash player for the week. Drew, you and I this season so far, we've seemed to just kind of target the same games. We're in lockstep because, ladies and gentlemen, Caleb Williams may have arrived last week. Heading into the year, we knew that the talent was elite. We knew it might take a little bit of time, but after last week, he kind of looks like he's coming into his own. And like you said, who does he get this week? Oh, baby. We'll talk a little bit more about why this is a good matchup for Caleb Williams as well as Roma Dunze a little bit later. But he heads into this week in the expert consensus rankings as the quarterback 17 after going 33 for 52 for 360 yards last week. Yes, he did throw a pair of interceptions. I don't throwing it that much and completing it that consistently. I feel like he's undervalued right now because this Chicago running game, let's be honest, it has stunk so far this season to the point where Roshan Johnson is getting a lot of waiver wire buzz this week after going for a magical 8 carries for 30 yards last week. And all of a sudden, he's supposed to be the guy in Chicago in that run game. So that tells you about everything you need to know. And, of course, the Rams, like we said, they've been terrible against quarterbacks. They've been terrible against wide receivers through the first 3 weeks of this season. And now we see Chicago kind of starting to stretch Caleb out a little bit and test his limits. Those first 2 weeks of the season, his yards per attempt were 3.2 and 4.7. That jumped up to 7 yards per attempt last week. And, guys, it's not like he hasn't been throwing the ball. There's a lot of opportunity here with Caleb. He's second in the league in pass attempts so far this year with 118. He's second in deep attempts with 11. Chicago is running 2.15 plays per minute. That puts him 8th in the league. And they've been 27th in game script, which means they've been behind, so they've been throwing the ball even more. So there is a lot of things to like about Caleb Williams' opportunity right now. And yes, there are also huge warts in his rookie profile. He has been 31st in yards per attempt so far this year through week 1 and week 2, and then comes up a little bit last week. And he's also 32nd in fantasy points per drop back, which not great. But you know what? We started to see that improve a little bit last week. But at the same time, there's a stat we have called expected fantasy points per game. And he's underperformed in that metric versus the opportunity he had. His expected fantasy points per game versus actual fantasy points per game, his expected is 18.6, which would put him 9th amongst quarterbacks. So all that to say, he's probably been missing some opportunities that a more experienced quarterback would get right now that result in extra fantasy points. So we saw a peak last week at what his ceiling could be. And like Drew said, because of the Rams defense, we could see that ceiling threatened again. Because according to the Fantasy Footballers, schedule adjusted fantasy points, the Rams are bottom 3 against quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, and they're 26th against running backs. So All that to say, if you're playing the Rams defense, start your offensive players with confidence. And I was going to say that you should consider Chicago pass catchers too. But Drew, because we're in lockstep, you already took those words out of my mouth by touting Rome Odunze this week. So all that to say, if you have a Chicago Bear in the pass game this week, I would proceed with quite a bit of confidence.
Yes, more confidence than the both Deontay Foreman and Jerome Ford having being smash plays last week, which I'm glad I didn't have to make a decision in that. Now, I don't remember whoever had Jerome Ford, you win. So I knew I took Rhett's side on that, but yeah, I don't think anybody won in that battle. So if you guys going to agree.
I just knew Cleveland was going to be in a positive game script, but the Giants even put it on. I'm like, what the hell, man?
Everybody lost last week. Who lost?
Yeah.
Everyone.
Everybody.
But Nate, let's go ahead and start talking about potential winners and your second smash play for the week. Go ahead and tell us about him and why you like him.
So I'm going to compare it to. It's not exactly the same comparison. Last week, there was an opportunity for a receiver, and this being Adam Thielen, who had, again, the old adage of opportunity over talent. Or
how did that work out? By the way,
it did work out. He was the wide receiver, like 24 on the week, 25, 28. 28, which
good enough.
Hey, I'll take it. When he got in, I was thrilled. Did I start him anywhere? No, other than DFS. The DFS, and I even made a caveat that he's a DFS play. Very similar to this smash play too. We talked earlier. News and notes. Boom. Who's not playing or practicing? AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. It is a less than stellar wide receiver room, and so you have your choices of who's next man up. Of course, Dallas Goedert proved that last week. Dallas Goedert's not going to be a smash play because doesn't qualify within our criteria. Saquon Barkley, of course, benefited. Again, not in the criteria. Do we look at Johnny Wilson, my preseason favorite to sneak on before they signed this person? No, it's going to be Jahan Dotson. I am going to go on a limb and say this. I'm not the biggest fan of Jahan Dotson, but I'm a big fan of this situation, and the situation being Tampa Bay, ninth most targeted in the NFL out wide, which is where Jahan Dotson's going to be. They have the ninth worst DVOA adjusted fantasy points to the wide receiver position. I know Goddard's going to get his. I know Saquon's going to get his. I also think the Philadelphia Eagles defensively are going to not get theirs, but they're going to get it from Tampa Bay, who's going to look to rebound. They're going to come in hungry. And so I think this is going to be a high scoring game. I mean, right now it's 45 and a half, I think, over, which means both sides of the ball should be moving. Dotson is just going to have to be a target monster, as it seems gross to say. I'll say more heavily targeted than many of the other names out there in the wide receiver, 50 range, about where he's at. So I think as this deep leagues flex DFS type play, Jahan Dotson is one of those guys that if I had to scour the waiver wire, the icky of the icky, he is going to produce the sticky of the sticky.
Ugh.
Yeah.
The stickiest of the icky.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think I said that right.
Come smoke with your boy Rick James.
My age. Oh, no. Oh. Yeah. Well, if he does well, maybe there will be sticky. Who knows?
Maybe that'll stick.
Yeah. Maybe we should move on.
Moving forward, Drew, your second smash play, ironically, for week 2.
Yeah, right. So before I get into that, real quick, Mark and Souls had a quarterback question for us. Rodgers versus Denver, Donald versus Green Bay. So I'll tell you this. We're going to get to our pass segment here in a little bit, and I'm telling you that you should pass on one of these guys, and it's not Sam Darnold. I think that Darnold has the better matchup, and I think he has the better set of weapons at his disposal right now. So I would roll with Darnold. I don't think you can expect like the 3-4 touchdown game he had last week. But I do think that he is in a better spot than Rodgers, and I'll expand on that a little bit later. But as far as my other smash play, so far this year, George Pickens has a 24% target share, which is 20th among receivers. Not bad. He's got a 31% first read percentage, which is 17th among receivers. Also not bad. But if you own George Pickens in any of your fantasy leagues, you probably don't care about any of that because he's barely a top 50 fantasy receiver on the year. And he's got weekly finishes of wide receiver 26, wide receiver 63, and wide receiver 45. But whenever you consider the fact that the first 2 weeks, he was often matched up against A.J. Terrell and Patrick Surtain. And then the Chargers, who he played in week 3, have been the 7th most difficult matchup for fantasy receivers. It becomes a little bit easier to understand why he struggled to put up fantasy points to start the year, but it is finally happening. The George Pickens week is upon us. The Colts have been the 7th best matchup for receivers based on schedule-adjusted fantasy points given up to the position. And as friend of the show, Debro from over at Fantasy Pros pointed out on Twitter earlier today, the Colts run single high at the 10th highest rate in the league. And against single high, Pickens has almost 3 yards per route run, and he has an insane 52% first read share. And the Colts also give up the 12th highest percentage of fantasy points to receivers that line up out wide. And that's where Pickens lines up over 70% of the time. So Fantasy Pros Week 4 ECR has Pickens at wide receiver 27. I've got him up at wide receiver 19. I think it's finally George Pickens week.
Yeah, I'm a Pickens guy. I've always been a Pickens guy. Mr. Scampers is also out here. Touting our boy Sniper Mel, who joined us tonight. Scampers, fan of anybody who joins us because he is the dude. Scampers is that dude. Yeah, he's the GOAT. So moving into my second smash play for the week, guys, I think we can all agree, first off, before we get any further, that we can probably agree that the Tennessee Titans are not a great football team, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it's fair.
I think the Will Levis thing is not quite working out so far. Agreed.
Yeah. Also fair.
Yeah. So this makes the running game all the more appealing. And when you look at Tony Pollard against the Miami Dolphins this week, we have another prime matchup for a running back who enters the week as the ECR running back 21. Miami, for everything they're going through right now, their receivers can't get off the ground. They're having quarterback issues. Their saving grace on offense is the Devon Achane at the moment. Unfortunately for them, they can't stop anybody against the run either right now because they are second worst in the league at in schedule adjusted fantasy points. So they're giving up a ton to these running backs. And Tony Pollard has accounted for 76.5% of Tennessee's rushing yards so far this season. Even when he wasn't at his best last week, he still had a 63% snap share. He still had 4 targets. Yes, Tajay Spears had more carries than him, but at the end of the day, you're looking at a guy who still seems like he is the full-blown number 1 in Tennessee right now. And with Will Levis being dicey right now, they might just lean on that run. But looking at this is going to be those matchups of a so-so run game against a bad run defense. And you kind of have to pick your poison. And for me, I'm looking at Tony Pollard, and I'm looking at last week as a matter of bad game script. They were behind. They played most of the game behind. Therefore, you take Tony Pollard out of that game. You preserve him a little bit later. But I'm going to go ahead and start him in confidence this week. But at the same time, with Tajay Spears being probably just as talented as Tony Pollard. For the sake of transparency, for those that are watching, it's worth monitoring Tajay Spears and what happens this week. Because we said it heading into the season that these two were going so close together in ADP. They were so close in talent level. And in the early season, it's been Tony Pollard, but Tony Pollard is also declining yards per carry from week 1 to week 3 so far this year. So if that trend continues, I'm saying start Tony Pollard this week because I love the matchup. Mm-hmm. But if you see Tajay Spears have a breakout game this week against the same running matchup, then going forward, you really have to consider Tajay Spears in the long term as perhaps being the better answer for the Tennessee Titans going forward in the season. What are your thoughts on that, fellas?
I like Spears going into the season better, but the last 3 weeks of 2.5 weeks, I guess, have really kind of changed my opinion on Tony Pollard. Even if the fit's not necessarily as ideal as what we wanted out of Tajay Spears, I think that a lot of that's going to fall on Will Levis's shoulder for taking them out of drives when Pollard was sustaining many of them. I mean, when you have, what is he averaging? not averaging, but he has 8 interceptions and 8 fumbles or something crazy like that through 3 games. I mean, it's he's a drive killer, which is really hindering Pollard's true upside.
Yeah, I mean, Will Levis has really not done the job so far this season. And considering they just traded Malik Willis, who was their most viable backup, I mean, it seems like it is Will Levis until the wheels fall off in Tennessee, which may be sooner rather than later. But once again, our listeners, they are coming in hot tonight. We are so appreciative of the questions they have for us. We have another one right here. Mark and Souls is asking that he just traded Tony Pollard for Mike Evans. Good deal, Drew?
Yep. I like it. I don't think you need to, go too much farther than that. But yeah, I think that's a good deal.
Yeah, same. Next up, we have from our boy Stampers. He says he's benching Waddle everywhere. But God, people seem to be hitting conversations we've had off screen throughout the week. How worried are we about Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, I think it's fair to be very worried. Sorry, Nanny, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to put this next part on. Now that that's on there, I want to put this next part on the screen because Scampers had a follow-up. Not only are we worried about Tyreek, but would you start any of the likes of Dowdle, Akers, Sharp, or Jerome Ford over him in half-point PPR, assuming the best-case scenario for guys, assuming that Mixon doesn't play in front of Akers, assuming that Kenneth Walker's out for Charbonnet, that kind of thing. I'll just say that Tyreek has fared better than Waddle with backup quarterbacks, but my God, Skylar Thompson looked awful. Charbonnet, I'm going to talk about him a little bit later. Spoiler alert! In our past segment, his matchup against Detroit is brutal. But if there's no Kenneth Walker, then he's going to get the volume. I would consider Akers because Akers, if there's no Joe Mixon, he's also going to get the volume again. And his matchup against Jacksonville is much more friendly for fantasy running backs. So I get if you wanted to play Akers over Tyreek, but I think that's probably the only one I would even consider. But even then, it's tough. I don't know, Nate. Where are you with your worry for Tyreek and then these guys that Scampers has?
I mean, the worry is, of course, there. I do have some hope in that I think Tyler Huntley's a better fit for the team to be able to actually create a little bit of spark. And I think that might be the one saving grace is that hopefully it's that Huntley comes in. Not that Skylar Thompson shouldn't have already done this, but he should look at Tyreek Hill and focus on Tyreek Hill and never take his eyes off Tyreek Hill and just get the ball to Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill.
That should be the game plan.
NHN. But
Tyreek Hill and HN.
Exactly. And but yeah, if that was like Rhett, you were talking about, that was a question, is now a sell proverbially, quote unquote low, or, you trying to buy low, if you will, because I don't think it's the value for Tyreek. If you find a person who's overly optimistic that Tyreek is still the, alpha top 5 fantasy wide receiver, maybe you can get something really, really good in return. But I'm holding out hope. I'm still optimistic. Tyreek's still Tyreek.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say next is that it only takes one Tyreek week to make you look like a complete idiot, right? Because he's just still one of the most explosive dudes in the league. So, I mean, you bench him, and it's likely the week that he gets 35 and 2 tutties on 4 catches for 120 yards. So, I mean, that's the Tyreek thing. It's like you can't sit him because you know what he can be, but he just hasn't been that yet. So, it does make it a difficult situation.
Yeah, I don't feel great about it, but I'm starting him everywhere. I've got him. I mean, I can't bench him.
No, he's kind of like, I hate to compare him to the same, but I have the same sensation, same feeling that like with Anthony Richardson. I hate the idea that I don't want to start Richardson right now, but
but you got to.
You have to. It's like it sucks. I mean, unless you happen to have went the chaos route and you took him and backed it up with Jaden Daniels, which is the only other person really that made sense as far as a later quarterback to have gotten. But usually that's an odd pairing, and most people probably wouldn't have taken on that much risk. But all right, Rhett, sorry, back to you.
No, I literally had the question. I literally had the thought in my head earlier today that I was like, man, I was thinking of my Scott Fish Bowl draft, and I was just thinking, man, I should have took Jaden Daniels at the 109 in the first round. I'd be a lot better off right now than this killer 5-1 start that I have going on right now where I'm top 1,000. Not bragging at all. But anyway, Sniper Mel coming back at it and asking, are we keeping CMC with no IR slots on your rosters right now? I can speak to this very well in saying, yes, I am, but I also have Jordan Mason that I picked up on waivers. So, it makes my life easier because I can just slip in the backup plan once everything's done. So, I mean, that's an easy decision for me. But Drew, if you don't have CMC, if you don't have Jordan Mason and you don't have an IR slot, what's your stance on holding CMC right now?
Yeah, you absolutely have to hold him. I mean, you ride this thing out to the end unless you can get. I'm not trading him for anything less than what like a first round pick in redraft should still be worth either. I don't know if he would still go in the first round if we did a redraft, which I don't know if we'll get to do tonight, but we might do next week. But I'm not selling low on CMC, and I'm damn sure not dropping him. You just kind of got to ride this thing out if you can't get good trade value for him, but definitely do not drop him.
Yeah, it feels like an easy call, right, Nate?
Yeah, and I think there's optimism with him going to Germany for this PRP injection stuff that I think they're doing. It's procedures and practice that we don't have here in the States. So I think that there's optimism and hope that I think it's always been a pain tolerance thing more than anything else. And I think that can help strengthen that tendon and get them back. Question I have is, what CMC will we get? I think many will say, oh, well, they'll just split carries between him and Mason.
No,
I don't believe that'll be the case. I think as soon as he's back,
maybe the first game or two.
Yes,
but
agreed. And then and then at that point, it's like, he's putting Mason on mute or on unread, I think, as they say, and he's just going to sit over there and hang out. So leave him on unread. That's
You're saying leave him on red, and the Millennial Emmy is just going new phone who dis.
Oh, gotcha.
for that dated reference for my people. But guys, let's go ahead and get to our past players for the week. Nate Markham, this guy we talked about, you're going to talk about, had a lot of hype heading into the season. And to be honest, it hasn't quite worked out so far this season for various reasons. Sniper Mel doing better than me in the Scott Fish Bowl. I hate you. But go ahead, Nate. Tell us about this past player for the week that, has been a complete dud and a huge disappointment so far this year.
I mean, until I see some signs of life and optimism, I don't feel comfortable starting Mark Andrews. And I know that for many tight end enthusiasts that were thinking, hey, he's bound to turn a corner and it's bound to happen, that the trend's just not going the right direction. 73% snap share in week 1, 63% in week 2, 33% in week 3. When a person like Charlie Kolar is seeing more snaps. Now, granted, I know that they're more blocking snaps because they're playing 12 personnel and they're trying to pound the rock. I get it, but it sends alarm bells off, guys. I know that its previous history with Lamar is enough to say, don't worry, put some earmuffs in. But if you look at the 90 wide receivers / tight ends that have ran 50 routes, he ranks Mark Andrews 82nd out of 90 in targets per route run at 0.12. Now, another familiar name at the bottom down with him at like 84, 85 is Sam Laporta. So maybe, hey, we hold out hope for both of those two guys. But I have a lot more faith in Laporta just because I think that passing offense is going to be driven through the pass much more likely than Baltimore will be. So until I have that good feeling about Mark Andrews, I can't. And tight end wastelands. Tight end is a wasteland. It sucks, but even then, still.
2024 was supposed to be the year of the tight end renaissance, and no, we're just right back in the Mad Max era of tight ends, baby. It is tough in these tight end streets right now. Whenever we're ranking Brenton Strange near the top 12 for the week, I'm just gonna put that out there for people.
Yeah.
So
I'll say this too real quick before we move off of that. It's going to be really interesting because Buffalo, they give up almost nothing to outside receivers, and they've given up at least as far as the percentage of the fantasy points to pass catchers they've given up on the year. The majority of it has come to those that line up in the slot, and the majority of the slot snaps have come from either Isaiah Likely or Mark Andrews. They've got Flowers and Bateman and those guys on the outside. So it's going to be very interesting. This is the week. Like I've been worried about Andrews. The two worst teams I drafted this year, the Scott Fishbowl team and our Fourth and Frames Listener League team. Both of those leagues are the two leagues I drafted Mark Andrews in. Coincidence? I think not. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens this week. This is kind of the week for me where the matchup is lining up. They have the supposed advantage, where Buffalo is most vulnerable in the past. So if it doesn't happen this week, it's like, man, now I'm full panic mode at that point.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all because this Mark Andrews thing has not been great. And to be honest, Lamar Jackson hasn't looked super great throwing the ball so far this year either. So, it's Baltimore 1-2 start. Derrick Henry off to a good start. But, this Baltimore offense, especially the pass offense right now, probably a few more questions than answers. But speaking of questions that we have, let's go ahead and let's talk. Let's see our Colby right here. He's saying to pick 3 out of 4 here in PPR. We have Josh Jacobs, Garrett Wilson, Stephon Diggs, and Deontay Johnson. I'll go ahead and start now. I will say this. I'm about to tell you why I don't think Garrett Wilson is your pick this week. So I would go Jacobs, Diggs, and Deontay Johnson out of those 4. Nate, where are you?
Deontay's one, which is crazy. Out of those 4 names, Deontay's the first one that I feel the most comfortable about. But I really do. I feel like that's just the pathway to the most volume and even stability. I want to hear why you're out on Garrett Wilson over. For me, it's like Diggs seems somewhat safe, but Diggs at the same time, it seems like we know Nico's the alpha, and then it's just a matter of the combination between Diggs plays, it seems more snaps and running more routes than Tank, but I would probably sit Diggs myself, but maybe I'm on an island.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'll just say this: Tank Dell mispracticed today. There's a chance he doesn't play this week.
So well, there you go.
If there's no Tank Dell, then I think it makes it easier to play Diggs, and it just makes this question even more difficult because even though Garrett Wilson has a tough matchup, and I agree with what Rhett's going to say here shortly, it's still tough for me to set him compared to the other guys on the list. Like I think for me, it's probably Garrett Wilson and Deontay Johnson. I think Jacobs is the one that I'm out on. It says pick 3 out of 4. So I think I play Wilson, Diggs, Deontay, and I probably said Jacobs, but that's tough, man. I see why you're having a tough time picking between those 4 guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a tough threesome to force them to pick from right there. Nate, Sniper Mel just wanted to ask you real quick: are you FF7 IDP this year?
I am. No, that's a league. The FF7s, it's an IDP league that we've been in together before, and I am not in it this year. I tried to tell myself I was going to temper some of my leagues, and I don't have regret. I have regret that I'm not in that one, just because that was, some of my favorite people are in it. It's always good banter. It's great competition, but can't do it. So now that just means for you, Mel, you have to win the whole thing. Not that I won it before or anything. I'm far from that, but just, I'm rooting for you. If you're in it as well, I assume that's the reason for the question.
Yeah, and I am also hoping that Mark Andrews just does not have the Cam Newton recovery ability from car crashes, and that he will be back, because I have Mark Andrews a lot more places than I wish I did. So I'm with you on that one, Scampers. I think it's okay to trade CMC, but you got to be getting like solid value for it. It's not one of those things where I'm willing to sell low, because as we said earlier, once he comes back, there might be like one game of splitting carries with Jordan Mason, but I think it's going to be all systems go back to CMC RB1 once he is back after maybe a game or two. So I don't sell him just for the sake of selling him.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. So real quick, we got couple more passes we need to get to. Speaking of passes, Drew Scott, The man you're about to mention last week looked like his former self last week. So why are you passing on Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, I'll bring this question back for Mark and Souls. Rodgers versus Denver, O'Donnell versus Green Bay. I took Sam Darnold, and that is because Aaron Rodgers, he's probably going to be a popular guy this week for a streaming option because he came off his best game in a Jets uniform, and so you might be tempted to start him, but I don't think that's a really good idea. So far this year, the Broncos given up the fourth lowest amount of schedule adjusted fantasy points to the quarterback position, and I mean have been the only team to figure out how to slow down Baker Mayfield this year apparently, and they're a much easier defense to run against. I think the Jets are going to end up winning this game against Denver pretty easily, and I've already gotten myself into trouble trying to predict game scripts with Cleveland and the Giants last week, but we are back and I'm doing it again. But I think if you start Rodgers, you're just hoping that he's the reason that they're in the lead because he threw a couple of early passing touchdowns. But Rhett's going to tell you why the number one option in the passing game isn't a great idea this week. And no, I'm not talking about Tyler Conklin, Nate. And if that guy's not going to be a difference maker, I'm not really sure how you can depend on Rodgers either. I think this is going to be a big Breece Hall and Braylon Allen game, and I think it's going to be an opportunity for the Jets defense to show out. The Fantasy Pros Week 4 ECR has Rodgers at quarterback 20. I've got him down at quarterback 24, so he's barely a starter in 2 quarterback leagues for me.
Conklin had a good week last week, by the way, too.
He sure did. He sure did.
On my bench.
So
on the waivers.
Yeah, you hit me with the segue. So let's go ahead and let's talk Garrett Wilson because, guys, if we know anything about Aaron Rodgers through the years, is that my man is a creature of habit, right? I mean, all of a sudden, Aaron Rodgers comes back, and what do we see in week 1? We see Alan Lazard back from the dead and resurrected. What do we see in weeks 2 and 3? We see Tyler Conklin coming back and having better games. So when I say Garrett Wilson is a sit for this week, a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's just not that full-blown rapport going on with Aaron Rodgers just yet, guys. That's not to say he's been bad so far this season. I mean, his finishes have been wide receiver 29, wide receiver 33, and another wide receiver 29 in PPR formats. But it's not what Garrett Wilson's ceiling is. I mean, you take Garrett Wilson, you're expecting rookie Garrett Wilson that could get you 90 catches, 1,200 yards, and threaten 7 or 8 touchdowns. Guys, in week 2, Garrett Wilson had 2 targets. In his other 2 games, he's only had 6 targets. And this is supposed to be the top option in that offense right now. And then to make matters worse, who else is he drawing this week but Patrick Surtain, who is quickly establishing himself as, if not the top corner in the game, one of the top corners in the game. So for me to sit Garrett Wilson this week, there's a variety of things this week. Denver's been the second best defense against wide receivers. The Jets are a 7.5-point favorite. So there are a lot of factors that much of it has to do with game script that if they get ahead early, like Drew said, there could be a large dose of Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. But also this. If Garrett Wilson has himself another so-so week, that trade window and that trade bar to acquire him gets lower and lower and lower. Which means, as an owner, as a non-Garrett Wilson owner who has belief in that talent because he is extremely talented, there is so much value to be had if he has more of these so-so weeks because it ain't going to be this way forever. We're 3 weeks in and he's been so far. He's only had 14 targets. There's a 10 target, 7 catch, 130-yard game on the horizon for Garrett Wilson. And the advice right now is to get in on that before it happens and that buy window slams shut in your face. So sit Garrett Wilson this week. I say that confidently, but also if he has another week where he's so, find that Garrett Wilson owner and open up that trade window and be like, hey, man, notice Garrett Wilson is struggling. How do you feel about the possibility of moving him? And just see where it takes you. The worst you can get is right back where you are right now. So trying to make it happen.
I love this spite benching, by the way, too, Mel. Top-notch play. Always, if you have a chance, bench Rodgers out of. I'm guessing it wasn't out of spite, but you could say it was because I would like that. Actually, I would do the same thing myself.
Yeah. I can't go full sit Garrett Wilson. I do think you should temper expectations this week, but I've got him in every lineup where I've got him. But it is a tough matchup for sure.
So yeah, guys.
And this right here, Scampers, don't think Lazard is going away. Yeah, in matchups like this, like we know where Denver's attention is going to be. Like we know where Patrick Surtain is going to line up. He's not lining up to cover Adam Lazard. And just like Christian Gonzalez wasn't covering Lazard last week, it's Garrett Wilson, and so I think this could be another week where Lazard is going to be playable just because Surtain is probably going to be all over Garrett Wilson. So, yeah, there are better days ahead for Garrett Wilson for sure. And I do, to Rhett's point, I think he's a great trade target right now.
Yeah. So very quickly, guys, let's just briefly tell people who our second pass player for the week is and who our stash players are, because to be honest, this conversation and our listeners have been so fantastic tonight. But we got Shoot the Gap after us that needs to come through and give us their info. So, Nate, quickly give us your second pass for the week.
Yeah, I'm still passing on Brandon Ayuk for one more week before he goes full send. We said the name earlier, Christian Gonzalez, so I have his hands full with him and even Jonathan Jones. Just don't like the matchup. Think that I'm going to seek other options.
Drew?
For me, I cheated on this a little bit because we're supposed to pick running backs inside the top 20. Zach Charbonnet, running back for the Seattle Seahawks, is technically slightly outside of that. But I think we need to talk about Charbonnet this week, though. He's coming off the back-to-back top 12 running back weeks. He's running back 9 on the season. And so I think a lot of fantasy managers at this point are just plug and playing him in their lineup. But we don't know what Kenneth Walker's status is. If Kenneth Walker's out again, you're playing in because the volume's going to be there. But if Kenneth Walker's active, they're playing Detroit, they've been the toughest against running backs this year. It's been a couple years now. They've had a really tough run defense. So if Charbonnet finds himself in a split with Kenneth Walker against a tough defense, just at least check and see if you have better options. Don't just plug and play him because of what he did for you the last 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah. And for me, my second sit play for the week is Jaden Reed. I hate sitting this guy because I love him as a player, but we don't know what the Jordan Love situation is right now with Malik Willis in the lineup. His snap share is going down from 70% to 55%. He's 75th in air yards, 75th in A-dot. Yet at the same time, because of that monster week 1, has 3.46 yards per route run and 14.1 yards per target. So it's a small sample size. It's a strange profile right now with Jaden Daniels. But as long as Jordan Love is out of the lineup, which he could play this week, and in that case, I would say be more confident in starting him. But if it is Malik Willis, once again, we're going to say very simply, come back soon, Jordan. We miss you. And quickly,
hey, Nate, real quick, this one's for you.
Yeah, I know. I was looking up my rankings, and I don't want to look them up because I don't want to go by. I'm gonna still go with Tyreek just because even though the matchup for Tyreek sucks too, because that'll probably be a lot of L'Jarius Sneed, which is not far removed from Christian Gonzalez. So. Tell you what, Scamp, Ayuk might be the actual better. Like if you're looking, I hate that because I just said I'm fading Ayuk, and I am as far as like if the option I was going to say if you have better options, but I mean son of a bitch is Tyreek Hill. You shouldn't have better options than Tyreek to choose from, but it could be the week 1 of Tyler Huntley. You know what? No, I'm going Tyreek. I'm putting my foot down. It's Tyreek.
What a roller coaster.
What a ride.
I know. More to come next week.
All right, real quick, just you guys give people your stashes. The guys that are rostered right now in under 50% of sleeper leagues, but you feel good about their futures. Nate?
Kamani Vidal. I feel even worse about Gus Edwards. J.K. Dobbins, unfortunately, with the injury history, Kamani Vidal should be someone that you can scoop up that, given that situation with that offense and that run scheme, could really pay dividends.
Drew?
Tight end position has been a freaking nightmare this year. If you invested in a top tight end or if you're trying to stream tight end, whatever, they all stink. So why not go stash Eric All, since the rookie tight end with the Cincinnati Bengals? He's got a 29% target per route run, which is second among tight ends. He's got a 10.7% first down per route run, which is sixth among tight ends, and a 1.93 yards per route run, which is also sixth among tight ends, according to Jacob Gibbs at JA Gibbs _23 over on the Twitter machine. and he is 5th among all rookie pass catchers in yards per route run so far. And now it's a smaller sample size for him than some of those other guys. But before he got injured at Iowa, he was solid. I think Mike Gesicki, we kind of know what he is at this point. And so I think Eric All could be a guy that you could possibly play down the stretch. So if you got the room, go stash him.
I did it in a couple leagues tonight based off of looking at the show sheet. And for me, I'm just going to go ahead and say stash Tyler Beatty simply because we don't know what that Denver running game is on a week-to-week basis right now. And he finished the game last week with a very impressive 9 carries for 70 yards. I mean, anytime you do that, I don't care about the game script. It is just one of those situations where if a guy flashes that sort of talent, you have to try to give him another opportunity somewhere down the road later on this season. So once again, it is a very deep stash, big rosters, or 14 or 16 team leagues. But I'm looking at Tyler Beatty and looking at the possibility that you're monitoring him in case he does have another one like that on the horizon. So before we get out of here tonight, we have one more trade question that we want to get to from our listeners. Antonio Lopez is saying, would we do Nick Chubb and Jalen Waddle for Josh Jacobs in a PPR format?
I would, yes. I don't trust Chubb coming back necessarily healthy. I think that I have more reservations about that injury. And even though he's superhuman, I still feel like, and I wasn't high on Josh Jacobs, but I think that offense should be pretty potent, especially when Jordan Love comes back. Drew?
Yeah, I agree. I would take Jacobs in that deal. We don't know how long Tua's going to be out. I'm not extremely confident that Chubbs is going to come back, and I know he's eligible to return in week 5. We've gotten no news on Nick Chubb up to this point, unless I missed it. Like, we've gotten positive drum beats for Jonathan Brooks. I haven't seen anything for Nick Chubb, and his injury, at least if I'm remembering correctly, is much more severe. So I know that Nick Chubb, like you said, is one of those superhumans. But with how Green Bay has used Josh Jacobs and how good the offense is, I would be okay doing that trade. And man, you want to talk about feeling good leaving a draft, and then how the NFL can just shove it right in your face. Imagine leaving your draft with Tyreek Waddle, Kupp, Nico, and Ayuk. Ugh. And then now knowing what we know through 3 weeks, it's like, man, that must really stink. But like, whatever you left the draft is like, wow, that's incredible.
1 out of 5 ain't bad, Scampers. 1 out of 5 ain't bad.
I'd love to hear what the running backs are that you have tried to patchwork together. Oh,
and he says he's never a 0 RB guy, and he finally tried it out, and now look what happens.
We learn lessons the hard way sometimes. So, fellas, that's it. Nate, you can find him at Nate Markham on Twitter. Drew, you can find at Drew3MR. You can find me at RManuel Sports. Guys, we got to get out of here. So much love for you guys for hanging out with us tonight. All these questions, all these comments, all these responses. Dog, it felt good being back in the saddle with you guys tonight. So we're so thankful. We're so appreciative. We're blessed to do this every week. I'm blessed to talk ball with these two guys. So we're going to get out of here. Shoot the gap behind us. For Nate Markham, for Drew Scott, I'm Rhett Manuel. And as Chris Battistel always signed us out with, toodles, baby.
This should be played at high volume, preferably